how did we get here? How does this story unfold? This whole Holy Week and Jesus' passion narrative, how do they come together? God is, of course, God, and since God is omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, meaning everywhere, omnipotent, all-powerful, and even omnitemporal in all times and places, God's got to be in control, not only of the Holy Week as we see it depicted in the Gospel of John, but also this particular Holy Week right now. Nothing happens outside of God. Still, we're not a bunch of automatons going through the motions. We're not just here following some divine choir master looking for the cues and the entry and exit points. God gave us a brain. God is not a divine puppet master pulling our strings. We have agency. That's partially the cornerstone of why I am a Baptist to this day. But it's also something that is repeated over and over again in Scripture, and nowhere is that story depicted more clearly than on this rather unusual stop on Holy Week. I won't say that I never grow tired of my mother accusing me of making up this ecclesial stop. I don't look for the opportunities to talk to my fellow pastors in ministry who say, "Spy what?" And I tell them to look it up on the internet because it must be true if it's out on the internet, right? No, there's a deeper, more profound theological reason why this stop is so important. Because in this moment, this stop is where we recognize agency and the decisions that we make. And each one of us has the opportunity to make a decision each and every day. We have the opportunity to make countless decisions. Sometimes it would even seem innumerable decisions. Someone is late for a meeting, and we get to choose how we're going to respond. Are we going to be petty? Are we going to be demanding of excuses? Are we going to be passive aggressive? Or are we going to look on the other with the eyes of grace and recognize that we are all human beings created in God's image, and that lateness, or whatever else it is, and you can fill in any other type of a faux pas, spiritual faux pas, sin, grievance, we get to decide how we respond. And that plays out over and over again. We can respond exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit, or we can choose to do it differently. And even though God is in control not only of this week, but all times and all places, God also finds you, each one of you who is here tonight, every single one of us, endlessly interesting. God can't wait to see what we're going to do next. God looks with the eyes of optimism. There is my creation. There is the thing that I made, and maybe they're going to do it good. Maybe they're going to do it in such a way that their choices point to not only what they believe, but in whom they believe. This is the connection between our faith and the works described in James 2. Just as the body without a spirit is dead, faith with no works is also dead. And this is where Judas comes into the story. And this is where the theological significance of the silly named Spy Wednesday comes into our faith journey. He made a decision. He knew what he wanted. He knew who Jesus was. And he just needed Jesus to realize it. Beyond everything divine in the Gospels, we see Jesus as an incredible reader of people, being able to see the other. I don't know about Jesus' clairvoyance. The Bible's not as clear on that as saying that he was both fully human and fully divine. But Jesus read Judas like a book. Jesus could look at him and probably in some ways see that sort of desire to be his follower, but that reluctance that was exhibited by the religious leaders. Judas had trouble with the plan as Jesus made it. As a matter of fact, Judas was struggling in general with God's plan, or even that whole concept of God is bigger than whatever we encounter. Our passage opens with Jesus talking. This is a program that is already in progress. It's sort of like, remember in the old days where you have the knob on the TV, made the noise when you change channels, and you flip over and you're like, oh, MASH! And then you go, wait, I haven't seen this episode. And you're trying to piece together what's happening. Hawkeye is doing what? Well, here's where we find Jesus in John 13. You see, what happened was he had just washed his disciples' feet. And now he was teaching in this program in progress. He showed what kind of a king he was going to be. That wasn't the same kind of king that people were looking for on Palm Sunday. He came in with love and humility. He got down on the floor in a way that made the disciples incredibly uncomfortable. They didn't like it. See, on Palm Sunday, the people were shouting, oh look, it's the Messiah. Great, he's going to kick out the Romans. That was the natural expectation, only that wasn't God's plan. See, that's where people confuse our ideas and God's ideas all the time. We still do that today. God loved humanity and still does. The plan was to proclaim the kingdom of heaven. And I'm going to say more about that in the next few days. But it was to show people a new way and invite them to live in the kind of love and unity that is possible in God's kingdom. And they seemed to misunderstand Jesus almost to the point of willful ignorance, almost to the point that it seems intentional. For example, in John chapter 9, Jesus gave sight to a blind man. We live in the modern age with incredible surgery. Jackie and I were talking earlier about her new eye on Monday, right? And how she said, I was driving on Tuesday. You know, and so we live in this age of wonder where so much is possible, and we see what would appear to be miracles play out all the time. First century Palestine wasn't exactly like that. In first century Palestine, blind was a permanent status. And so here we are in John 9, and Jesus gives sight to a blind man. Humanity's response in that moment should have been, break out the flags, let's have a celebration, this is amazing. However, religious leaders, and I feel like this cuts pretty close to home for me, because by some definitions I could be looked at in that light, the religious leaders instead were really upset that he did it on a Sabbath. In fact, they couldn't see the good because all they could see is he must be of the devil because he broke the Sabbath law. Jesus seemed to like to do that. In John 13, as he's talking and we join this program that's already in progress, he suddenly interrupts himself. My mind is troubled. And it's as if he remembered something that he already knew. And I'm sure you've had that experience where you're talking along, and all of a sudden something heavy, something weighty, something big enters your mind, and it causes you to pause. I picture that experience that we've had where we sort of and you've probably been talking to someone and had that experience, and they say, everything all right? I remember I was talking to my dad on the phone many, many years ago, and Melanie came in the room and mouthed the words to me that I wasn't expecting that day in that moment. And and he goes, do you need to call me back? It's that interruption. She was telling me she was expecting one of our children. And it's that interruption. So Jesus has that moment of interruption, and he's telling them these important things. And then the Bible here uses this Greek word, martyruho, which means to testify or bear witness. And so he interrupted himself to testify to the disciples, one of you is going to betray me. They didn't know what to do in that moment. They didn't know how to react. They didn't know how to make sense of the words that he said. I can imagine the incongruity of hearing those words and Jesus' conviction. That's why that Greek word is important, to testify or to bear witness. When he said them, he said it as a fact. This is going to happen. So they were probably dumbstruck, thinking about what they had just thought and heard. They were probably thrown off even more in John's telling, because he had just been on the floor washing their feet. So everything is sort of topsy-turvy. They might have turned to one another and said, did I just hear what I thought I heard? Did you hear that too? And Jesus probably continued with his lesson, and it says that one of the disciples, the beloved one, was sitting next to him, and Simon Peter from somewhere else in the room signaled to him, ask him who it is. So the beloved disciple leaned over. The Bible doesn't use the word whisper, but I'll bet he did. Who is it? I'm the beloved disciple. You can tell me. Jesus said, it's the one who I'm going to give this piece of bread after I've dipped it. And so then he turned, and I pictured the disciples sitting around the Passover Seder. There's a ritual, specific words to say, rich, meaning that these men would have been doing their whole lives. And in John, this is the first time we learn about Judas' betrayal. See, in Matthew and Mark and Luke, we get a much clearer picture, like the anthem for 30 pieces of silver. In each case, Judas went the day before to the high priest to make arrangements. John doesn't say this was the first time Judas thought about it. John doesn't say this is the first time that Judas conceived of it. I'm not trying to harmonize the Gospels. I'm just saying that this is where we learn of it in John. And after Jesus gives Judas the bread, it says Satan entered him. Now this is shorthand in the Greek world to say that he had abandoned God. The New Testament comes out of this Greek context, and here using that word Satan isn't intended to set up some sort of divine dualism between a good God and a bad something else, other God, I guess. No, this is just to say that at that point, Judas knew who Judas served. And Judas had decided that Judas was serving Judas. Judas had decided that Jesus did not know what was best. Judas had decided that Jesus no longer had the plan. He had chosen his path. He decided what Jesus needed, and what he thought he needed was a nudge. If I turn him over, I'm projecting a little bit here, but if I turn him over, maybe then he'll bring down fire from heaven to smite the Romans. That's maybe an overly generous reading of Judas. No matter how we interpret it, we get that agency, that freedom, that opportunity to make a choice. And this is what Spy Wednesday is all about. It's about our choices. It's about how we decide, who we decide for, and what we decide to do in each situation. We don't have the opportunity to betray Jesus to the high priests each day, but we have the chance to do countless many even micro betrayals. And so we can choose this day. We can choose who we serve, and we can choose how we follow. And we can choose, as we move forward in this rhythm of Holy Week, to keep our eyes focused on Jesus, because he proclaimed the kingdom and he said, "Follow me." He didn't tell Judas, "Make arrangements, decide what to do. You go ahead." He said, "Here's my kingdom and here's what it looks like. Follow me." And that's the decision we can make each day. Amen.